Welcome back to the After Dinner Leadership Podcast. My guest today has written a daily journal for the last 47 years. Unbelievable. And it has been both life-changing and life-expanding for him. And it's nice to find out the origin story behind that daily habit. Much of our conversation, though, is talking about his vocation as a coach and some of the methods that we can use to coach others and to build their capacity and increase and maximize their performance. I found this a delightful conversation. I hope that you do too. Please take a listen and share it with others who might benefit from some of the wisdom that Daryl has shared. Enjoy. And I'm delighted to welcome a very good friend of mine and a great executive coach, Daryl Watson. Welcome to the After Dinner Leadership Podcast, Daryl.
It's nice to be with you, Simon, for a little while. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you here. And what I'm excited about, whenever I have a friend or a colleague come on the show, is some of these questions we will have spoken about, but many we will not have done. And so it's genuine curiosity just to unveil a new understanding of you and how you work and the impact that you have as a leader across the world. So excited to dive into that. I'd like to take you back on memory lane first of all, though, and have you think about yourself as an early 20-something. What was memorable about you as a 20-year-old?
Memorable about me, I was very enthusiastic. I was excited to get out and be the
enthusiastic. You, Daryl?
Yeah,
sure?
Can you believe that? Yeah, absolutely. I was a different beast in my 20s, young, zealot-like. I had lots of enthusiasm, and I was convinced I was going to be a top super-duper salesman. That was my passion, selling and sales and building relationships. So that was my early 20s.
Great. And was there a mentor figure, whilst you may not have called them that someone that you sought guidance from or that provided that kind of advice, insight when you were in your 20s?
There was someone who came along a little later, my first boss in the company I was working for after I graduated. And he became and still is a bit of a mentor figure all these years later. In fact, I plan to go and see him in a few weeks' time. But he was a big influencer in my life in my late 20s, yeah.
What was it about his style that you appreciated or his approach?
Well, he was quite a solemn character, okay? But he was very dedicated to personal development. He always encouraged us to read the latest books, or at that time it was to listen to some tapes and things like that when we were in the car and traveling.
Brian
distances.
Tracy?
Well, I can't remember if it was Brian Tracy, but there was certainly a few of them back in the day. But he was a great motivator and certainly very passionate about learning and setting goals and developing yourself. So I put a lot of my kind of thinking down to him.
Oh, that's amazing. Interesting. You ended up in a career / vocation that is dedicated to that almost entirely, which is amazing.
Yeah. I think because of him, I've read, I don't know, dozens of books and thoughts over the years. I don't think he really appreciates just how big an influencer he was in my life, really. But he has been and continues to be.
Great. In what ways has that mentor role changed then, now that you're not 20?
How's it changed? Well, even over the years, Simon, I think he's been an influential figure from a distance. He was my boss for 7 or 8 years, and then I actually took on his role after he left the organisation, and I found myself in a role that was similar to his, where others were then looking to me for guidance and help, and that was quite a big part of my early career, because I started to then encourage others to do like he had showed me what to do in terms of books and development and personal development, things like that, and setting goals. So yeah, it kind of from, I wouldn't say father to son, but certainly from one business leader to the next generation coming through.
What was a book at that time that you read that you found particularly helpful for you in your 20s? Do you recall?
Back
Anything
in the
that he
20s,
encouraged you to read?
Probably a way back in those days, it would probably be 7 Habits by Stephen Covey, which was a major influencer for me. Always has been. I've read it 2 or 3 times since, but the kind of 7 Habits has been a really powerful book for me throughout my whole career. In fact, Stephen Covey has been such an influence. I remember one day some years ago, I was running a workshop, and I was teaching somebody. I was facilitating a session around time management, and quite funny that I says, "Is anybody familiar with this model?" And a wee hand went up. And it was actually Stephen Covey's grandson. I says, "All right, on you come on, you give us this session now." And he came up and he did a far better job at facilitating that learning session than I ever could. Right. But that was kind of a neat experience a few years ago. So probably that was one of the first ones I read.
Yeah, great. Yeah, it's really interesting. That was one of my first introductions from a personal development reading, the type of literature that I was reading. That was one. And it is one of those books that one of the chapter on being proactive, that I remember where I was when I was reading that, and literally the kind of the paradigm shift. He talks about paradigm shifts in the book, but that particular chapter was a massive paradigm shift for me, kind of opening up different thinking, kind of this idea of putting that gap between stimulus and response was the first time I come across that as a concept, and the circle of influence and concern just comes back time and time again as such a simple model, but communicates this idea of acting on things you can influence rather than wasting energy on things you can't.
I think for me too, Simon, I think this idea of beginning with the end in mind has always been a classic sort of little habit for me, and phrase that's stuck with me throughout my whole career. And often when you're looking at fixed projects or terms, there's always this idea, where do we want to be at the end of the day? So that's been quite a guiding principle for me too. Yeah,
brilliant. Great. Well, we'd love to hear a few more of your leadership lessons, and I always ask, what 3 leadership lessons do you wish you'd learned earlier?
I think one of the ones that I learned really by the end of my 20s was about setting goals and setting. I'd had a bit of an experience around a 5-year plan that I wished I'd known about when I was earlier. So I've oftentimes talked with people about setting 5-year plans. So usually 5 things in 5 years, and they're usually big goals, big ideas that can fundamentally drive and change who you are. So that was a big thing for me, and I've followed that pattern through my life. In fact, recently I've just had a big change in our life as we've come home from Belgium and the Netherlands abroad, and I've kind of looked at the next 5 years of my life. What do I want to do? Where do I want to be? Where do we want to be? So working through that just at the minute about the next 5 years, and that's been a big influence for me. So setting the plan and then working it. So that would be lesson number 1, I think.
Okay, great. And number 2?
Number 2, probably around something like values-based leadership. So when I kicked off after my management consultancy kind of career, working with one of the big consultancies, and I started out on my own about 10, 11 years ago now, I'd known a little bit about values-based leadership, but not an awful lot. But certainly the last 10, 11 years, it's been a huge part of my own consultancy, understanding what my values are, helping others to come to understand what their values are, and then recognizing that those are the biggest fundamental things that drive behavior. when you're honouring your values, living by them, and leading by them, they make a huge difference in all of your life, really. So a bit more about values-based leadership was probably something that I wished I'd known a little earlier. Although values have always been a strong thing for me, but being able to actually articulate them and actually help others to understand what theirs are was something that I think was really important.
Great. Love that. And what about the last one?
I think to be yourself. I've recognised that, when I started off on my own as well, I set up my company, and I called it. I remember sitting around this very table 10, 11 years ago, sitting with my kids and my wife at the time, thinking, right, what am I going to call this company of mine? I needed to set it up as something and trade as something. And my son said, you should set up as F5, Dad. It says F5. And he said, yeah, F5, the key on your keyboard, F5. I says, what does that do? He says, well, it refreshes your screen. And as you've explained yourself to me, then what you're doing is you're helping people to reflect and refresh, and kind of you get results from all of that. So he said, call yourself F5. But over the years, I've realised that actually nobody cares about F5. But everybody concerns themselves about Daryl Watson. What does he stand for? What's he about? And so being myself and honouring those values is really a key part for me. And if I'd been myself maybe earlier in my 20s, just really being true to me and true to those values, I probably would have discovered who I really was an awful lot earlier in my journey through life. I was always trying to do other things and impress other people. And now when I look back, that was just nonsense. It's just be yourself. And I think that would be the big leadership lesson I've learned, Simon.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. There we go. There's one thing I didn't realize. I knew about Consult F5 as a title. I'd never asked you, why did you name it that? And so I found that out. There we go.
There you go.
Also, I didn't know F5 refreshed the screen either. Does it still do that? I don't know.
According to my son, it does. But
I'm a bit scared to press the button now. I won't try it.
Don't press it after this call.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. So why don't we stay there for a moment, this idea of being yourself. I've talked about that with other guests, actually, just around that. And what was the trigger, or what happened to help you to come to that realization? You were talking about that it wasn't necessary. You were trying to impress people or something in your 20s. What do you remember when that changed, or when that learning came?
So again, it was with the kind of mentor figure, and he it happened over a period of about a year, and I had taken on some new responsibilities in the job I was in, and he'd said to me, and I had responsible for some sales teams, so some members of my team, and we were doing particularly well. And I can always remember, he says, Daryl, he says, how come your team's doing so well? And I says, well, I don't know really. I said, I just talk to them, and I listen, and I meet with every member of the team once a month, and I sit down and I'm curious, and I just really listen. And he said, oh, you're coaching them then? I said, oh, am I? And he said, yeah, and coaching was kind of in its infancy back then. And I think that sparked something in me, Simon. I was very aware that the team was doing well, and a few weeks after that, we were all at I was at a sales training program with my boss and a few other sales leaders across from the UK and Europe, and we went to the sales training. And he said, and I went through the morning. It was pretty poor. And I said to my boss, I says, what did you think to that? He says, oh, that wasn't great, was it? I says, no, it wasn't great. And the afternoon didn't get any better. So at the end of the day, I said to him, you know what? Why don't you let me have a go at running some of these sales training programs? Yeah, are you up for it? I says, yeah, give me a go. So he did. He took the risk, gave me a go.
Brilliant.
And subsequently, what was that now? Nearly 30 years ago. And I just loved it. And so I wrote my first sales training programs and really enjoyed that. And then over the years, just became a little bit more, hopefully, a little bit more proficient at them. But that was the inception of the change and where it began. I'd always enjoyed, I didn't mind standing up in front of people and facilitating things and learning. And I think my sales career taught me about relationship building and helping others. And but that was the beginning of who I am. I put it down to
And you
my
said
mentor.
that your manager had said you're coaching, and it feels like that penny dropped, almost like you identified with the coach. Am I reading that right? It's like this idea of a label of coaching, and I'm a coach, I'm doing coaching. What is it about coaching that helps you realize that is you?
Well, I think firstly, I love to listen. I could spend days just listening to people and I'm really curious about other people. And I think fundamentally, deep within my heart, Simon, one of my kind of values is really just being of service to others. And when I'm coaching, I'm really intent on helping that individual change and improve and achieve their goals, whether it's on an individual basis or in a wider scale with a team. Similarly, you're doing similar things, but being just genuinely really curious and interested in people and kind of non-judgmental. I just really like to help and I'm really curious. And that sparked that off for me. I think it just really aligned with my values of who I am. And so, I just think I love to listen to people,
Yeah. Okay. From a practical point of view, how do you change that? Well, listening is a two-way process. It's not just kind of absorbing information from somebody else, I know, but how do you balance that level of support and challenge when you're coaching? You got any advice to someone who's maybe starting out using these coaching techniques? Any thoughts on how you balance that?
I can remember some of my early days in my coaching individuals who I was working with, and initially you're a bit, it's a bit scary. It's a bit frightening because I'm thinking, what do I know about legal, solicitors, or what do I know about the medical profession, or thinking of others who have, or what do I know about construction, and I didn't know anything about these things. You'd go along and all I would be armed with were some questions and just a real interest in someone. So I recall an experience once where it was just very, very difficult to actually understand this individual. And I think for me, it was about being really genuine and just saying up front, I'm sorry, we'll say it was John. Sorry, John, I really can't understand what you're even talking about. So just being really silly and stupid and just, can you help me understand that? What does that mean? And just being very open with them. And again, this is going back to being me and just being, just sometimes I would use my Scottish accent as well, just to kind of plead ignorance and be stupid. But being that way and being myself really helped. And that has come to the fore in the years of coaching, because sometimes you just really don't know. And I think I was on a session recently with a fellow coach, another fellow from the Association for Coaching, and he was coaching me. And it's rarely that I get coached these days, but he was coaching me, and it was just as I listened to his penetrating questions, I'm thinking, whoa, that's a good one, because it really makes you think. And coaching's all about making the other person think
Yes.
and not being frightened to be silent. And for, 30 seconds or a minute, or sometimes if I'm holding a silence for 4 or even 5 minutes, that's hard because you just want to jump in. But actually just holding silence is a powerful coaching technique. Anyway, I'm going to go into coaching techniques now, but that's it.
Well, that's what I asked you for. I mean, maybe I'll flip it round. As you've developed your coaching practice, what are some of the elements that you've perhaps abandoned that you thought were effective in the early days and that you've kind of put emphasis elsewhere?
So I've over the years used a lot of different coaching models, and the models are quite helpful to structure a framework for a conversation. Your coachee won't be aware that you're using some kind of model to frame a conversation, and those are helpful. But actually, there's more going on now as I realise it, and I'm getting a wee bit older now. But the more that's going on is, it doesn't really matter what model you use. What really matters is that you're really focused and present in the moment with that individual when they need you most. And I like to use one of Nancy Klein's quotes from her book Time to Think, and that's that the individual, the brain that's kind of got the challenge or the problem, also has the answer to the problem or challenge. And my job as a coach is just to act like the guide on the side to help them to find what they're looking for. So sometimes the models go out the window because you're just so much when you're really in that kind of moment, that flow moment, like Chick Mahenti, I can never remember his name. It talks about, the guy, and he talks about being in flow. I've experienced that flow on so many occasions in coaching that it's just so beautiful, and it just resonates so well that there's a connection made.
Yeah, I agree. I often call it as kind of a sacred space. Where that happens. So this idea of actually there's frameworks, there's models, they help you to understand it, but what you're saying is don't have those as a straitjacket that you have to say, for example, grow. It's a good starting coaching model for a new manager to understand coaching frameworks, but don't be restricted by it. It should enable a really rich conversation rather than, oh no, I've got to move on to R, I've got to move on to O, that type of thing. Is that the vibe?
Oh, that's absolutely the vibe. And over the years, I've run many a different coaching program or course, and I'll introduce. You mentioned the Grow model. You introduced the Grow model, and inevitably that first practice session with these, who's ever learning, it's very clunky, and they get hung up about the questions and what they need to ask. But actually, once you've practiced it and used it a few times, it's actually just used it as a sort of framework, a simple framework to enable a really meaningful conversation. Yeah,
great. Okay, that's brilliant. So if you think about your first leadership lesson, then about goal setting and the idea of that, what role could coaching play in helping somebody to establish goals and to have that 5-year plan?
Well, coaching is really all about helping someone to maximize their potential and move forward in a positive manner. And regardless of which model of the many that you might use and choose from in coaching is always about an action set or agreeing an action at the end of something to move ahead. So inevitably there's always something to do. So I would generally before I even start a session, I would chat with the client and say, well, what do you want to achieve today? What's a good goal for our session? So there's always an outcome up front, and then I would work with them to achieve that goal. And sometimes there are a few action points that come out of that session for that individual. So yeah, goals are a really valuable part. I'll sing you a little song, Simon.
Go for it.
I learned this in my 20s. Set a goal and you will never fail. You can always do what you want to do. Set a goal. Be sure to write it down and you'll see what it can do for you. Set a goal. Be sure to act it out. If you work real hard, it will come about. Set a goal. Be sure to write it down and you'll see what it can do for you. Yeah.
Now, where on earth is that from?
Oh, well, that was from a good friend way back when I was a young missionary for our church many years ago, and he taught me that. And I've never forgotten it. It's just stuck in my head. And I remember some years ago, I was invited to do a session on goal setting for a particular company, Standard Life they were in their days. And over the course of 5 days, I ran 21 90-minute sessions across the length and breadth of the country. And I started off with that song. and by the end of each session, I was saying, "Oh, Daryl, can you record that for us? I'd like to use that." So I just by the second day, I'd actually had it written out, and I just take a picture of that on your phone. So that's what they were all doing. So, but there's some really important lessons in there about setting, writing things down and working them out and making that list. And that's really been part of my life. A big part of my life, as you know as well, Simon, because it's a massive part of me is my journaling.
Yes, I was going to link that through, actually. Yeah,
because
absolutely.
Setting goals and journaling has been something that's been a huge part of who I am.
Yeah.
So,
well, let's go there, because I was going to take you there if you hadn't done. So, yes, I mean, you started writing journal what age?
It was the Christmas day of 1977. My mother gave me a little journal. So I was 12. So on January the 1st, 1978, I started writing my journals. And I've never stopped. So
every day since 1978.
Every day. I may have missed like one or 2 days in all that time, but if I did, I'd catch up the next day. But those are like a handful. It's just become a disciplined daily habit for what's that now? That's like 47 years. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool, you're old, aren't you?
I'm old. Thank you very much. I'll get you back on that.
Daryl, I want to just decodify that a little bit. What's your journal practice nowadays? And maybe different from your 12-year-old self, but what's the process, or how talk me through how you go about writing in your journal?
So it has varied over the years. Firstly, you need a really good pen, by the way. You don't start. My 1978 journal was written in pencil, so never journal with a pencil. I think today, if you're in your 20s, you might not be writing. You're probably using some sort of thing online. But for me, it's about discipline. So every morning, I'm an early riser. When I was 12, when I went to high school, I had a newspaper delivery round, and I was in the newspaper shop for 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
So and that's never disappeared. So I'm still an early morning riser, and so when I get up early, I've got a pretty disciplined routine for myself. Usually takes 2 to 2.5 hours in the morning of personal study and kind of meditation and stuff like that. And my journal writing is about about 3 on my list that I do.
Yep.
And so I write about what occurred the day before. Sometimes it's really boring. and other times it's really insightful, where I've recorded really meaningful insights and about life, and recorded important events in life, recorded things, when kids get married, when there's deaths and
Yeah.
births and all that, change jobs and big important events. But I think my discipline has been mostly around insights for me, life important insights, personal things that really have helped me to recall important events in my life. Recently, when our grandson was born on the 26th of November, which was the day our daughter was born, who gave birth to our
Oh,
grandson.
amazing.
So they share the
Right.
same birthday. But I took a picture of our daughter's entry from the 25th, the 26th, and 27th of November 1999
Yes.
and sent it to her. And it was quite an emotional thing that she could experience what I had experienced for her when she was born. And so I was then able to record how I felt about the birth of her son, our grandson, in a similar manner in my journal. So very personal things as well, Simon, that are
Yeah.
really, to look back on, are really powerful.
Yeah.
So that's
How
kind of the
how do
discipline.
you? Yeah, great. So, thank you for sharing that, and congratulations on your grandson as well. That's brilliant news. Well, I love I've just started daily journaling again in the last few
Yeah.
months, probably inspired by you, actually, Daryl, and which I'm really enjoying. And I love the idea of pen on paper as well.
Yeah.
That I could access those reflections probably easier if it was writing on my iPad, but I
Yeah.
don't enjoy it as much. I do a lot of business
Mm.
stuff on my iPad, which I enjoy very much. But there's something about physical pen on paper which it seems significant in me being able to connect with what I'm reflecting
Mm.
on and trying to learn
Mm.
from. And that's an interesting thing. And so I'm finding it a really useful exercise and very good addition to my daily habits. Yeah.
Mm. I think too, Simon, there's in recent years a lot more around neurodivergent issues and mental health issues. You don't have to look too far. Jonathan Haidt talking about the phone generation and the play generation and
Yes.
stuff like that. But for me, I think there's a definite benefit from having journaled all these years. I think there's a greater personal self-awareness. I think there's I have much more clarity of who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really helped to combat some of the mental health issues that I see others suffering from, because not that I'm self-absorbed. It's not that. It's just that I'm much more, I think, aware of what's happening in my life and in the life of my family and wider, the clients I'm involved in, because clients, people, everyday experiences. That's what I'm recording and there to reflect on. So definitely has impacted, I think, mental health and things like that.
Yeah, there are definitely therapeutic qualities associated with it. I mean, one of the most stressful periods of my life that I went to journaling in quite an intense way to try and capture just some of the things that I was trying to process, and it was a really helpful thing. I mean, it makes for I'm not going to destroy it, but it when I've picked it up again, I go, wow, that's pretty dark. There's some stuff.
Yeah.
It was actually really helpful for me at the time, and I found that really, it was a good therapy. I didn't at that point. I hadn't taken on a coach or used any counselling, talking therapies, so it was a different form of almost being able to get to talk outside of my head onto the page rather than to somebody else.
Yeah, there's a lot in that sort of self-reflection and actually taking time to ponder and meditate and reflect on those things that matter most. And I've found it as a great tool. And I'm just so grateful, frankly, to my mother. My mother's been the greatest example. She's 89 now. She's kept a daily journal since she's, wow, my goodness, since the early 70s. So she's got a little more than me, but she's been a great example to me. So grateful to her.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I know that that is a big part of your legacy is helping people with that. So thank you. That's awesome. Great. Well, in the spirit of reflection and learning, Daryl, we're towards the end of our time together. I would love to take you back to your 20-year-old self or 25-year-old self. What advice would you give him?
Good question, Simon. I think I mentioned a little about being yourself. I wished I had the same sort of maturity as I have now. I wish I had it when I was 25. Be yourself. Be who you are. Don't be anybody else. Don't try to be anybody else. Be you, and live up to what you can potentially become. Probably wise to look to a mentor at university, at college, or at work, or in your family, someone who you can turn to and build that real strong connection with, someone that you trust, someone that you know is actually interested in you and curious, and build that relationship of trust with them and let them help you. Let them help you to grow and develop the skill set, and so that you'll become that individual that you're set out to become a little earlier. You know, I was probably in my late 30s or maybe 40s before I started to realise, but I'm so grateful for that mentor who helped me back then in my late 20s, who helped me to start to recognise those values. So be you, be yourself.
Great. Daryl, yourself has helped myself immensely, not just in this conversation, but we've had many coaching conversations which have been a great enriching force for me. So thank you for that. And I know that you'll be adding huge value to others that you coach as well. So appreciate you sharing some of your leadership lessons with us. And thank you. And I wish you the very best of success as you continue to develop your coaching. Your coaching practice is probably the best word, isn't it? Yeah. As you develop.
Thank you, Simon. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
If anyone wants to get in touch, how do they best do that?
Just look me up online, darylwatson.org. You'll find a lot of my blog posts there, and look out for my book. I'm publishing a daily devotional book based on all my blog posts this year, so I'll be around in the summer.
Great. Look forward to it. Maybe you could come back in the future and let us know a bit more about that.
Yeah, I'd love to do that.
Thanks, Daryl. Much
All
appreciated. Thanks. Thank you for joining us at the After Dinner Leadership Table, and trust that you've got good value from listening to this episode. Thanks for being here. One question for you. The question is, so what? What will you do with what you've just heard? And here's a few suggestions. Number 1, lead with more purpose. 2, mentor with patience. 3, share with pride. You think of anyone who you know that would benefit from listening to what you've just heard, that would help them to be a better leader today or in the future. Please share, like, subscribe. It helps other people to consume the content. And we wish you all the very best of success. And please listen again to another After Dinner Leadership conversation.